Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mat Time Podcast. I'm Nick Pomplin, joined as always by my co-host Brock Chittum. We're here to preview UFC 265. It is Derek Lewis versus Vs Gane for the interim heavyweight championship. We're also going to recap a very good UFC fight night between Uriah Hall and Sean Strickland. Let's get right into it. So the last episode we did, we were talking about the Derek Lewis versus Vs Gane interim championship fight and all the politics that went into making that fight. And obviously, things we didn't agree with when it came to Dana White and the strong arming that went into it. We'll definitely dig into that, but I wanted to cover this past weekend's card. It was headlined by Uriah Hall and Sean Strickland. So if nobody had seen the fight, so Sean Strickland won a pretty convincing unanimous decision. I think it was, not to be biased because I am a fan of Uriah Hall, but it definitely looked like he wasn't there for a majority of the fight. I think something had happened with his orbital on his left side that had taken him out of the fight early on. And we've seen it with Uriah Hall before, even without that injury, that sometimes he just doesn't mentally show up to a fight. And, Sean Strickland took over. And I mean, I've always wanted Uriah Hall to be a contender, but now that he is coming off of a 4-fight win streak and it's coming to an end with a guy like Sean Strickland emerging, and I think he's about 35, 36 at this point. I mean, is this the end of the road for Uriah Hall even being discussed?
It definitely makes it tough to argue another contendership or title run. Like you said, he might become that next gatekeeper in the division. Because you got a guy like Sean Strickland who's only on his way up now. Puts him in a difficult spot for sure.
Yeah, so the reason I wanted to bring up Sean Strickland is because I heard today that Luke Rockhold was offered to fight with Sean Strickland because Luke has talked about coming back for quite a few months now, and you talk about where he fits in. Should he fight at middleweight? Should he fight at light heavyweight? Because he was talking about fighting at 205 until Jan Blachowicz took his soul. So he comes back, and I guess he's thinking about going back to middleweight, and I guess Sean Strickland makes a good fight for him. You really don't know where Luke Rockhold is going to be mentally and physically. Is he going to be a changed fighter? Is he still going to make the same mistakes that he did before? Because he was one of my favorites before he had went on the skid he went on, and I do think as far as technique for technique, I thought he was going to be one of the sport's greats, but you just see how rough this sport can be and how quickly you can fall off, because at the end of the day, it's a fist fight, and sometimes you think you're invincible, but you're really not.
Yeah, sometimes it's just that, man. Like he's probably one of the most talented, athletic, skillful fighters in the UFC. Genuinely, he probably really is. But like you said, sometimes shit just doesn't go your way, and sometimes you have a bad day, sometimes you have a bad year. And it seems like he was that guy who just always got the shitty end of a good fight. He always got the shitty end of a big fight in his career. You see it happen a lot. It just sucks seeing it happen to a guy who had so much potential. To be honest, I don't know if that's the fight to make. I would imagine Sean Strickland would be trying to work his way up through the rankings, actually fighting people top 15, top 10, wanting to climb towards the belt. I just don't necessarily see how Luke Rockhold fits into Sean Strickland's agenda. I can see how it makes sense for Luke Rockhold. I can't see how it makes sense for Sean Strickland to take that fight.
Yeah, but then I would come back with Sean Strickland, especially his mentality after the fight, and what he seems to consistently voice is that he really doesn't care who he fights, and he means that. He just, I show up, I fight, I get paid, I like beating people up. So
okay. Fuck it, make the fight then, right?
Yeah, right. I honestly, as much as I like Luke, I'd have to step back and say, like, I don't know if he beats a lot of guys in the current top 15. I do think he's extremely talented, but what worries me is I think a lot of fighters, they need structure, and when they don't have structure, then you don't see the best version of them, because there have been countless fighters that I've been fans of that I've followed where if they have one of the big camps behind him, a Greg Jackson, an AKA, ATT, something like that. They usually do better than when they're traveling all around and they keep switching camps and
Kind of making their own fight camp, being their
yeah,
own coach.
which I hate that. Cub Swanson did that for years, and he wasn't the best version of himself. He would, go to Greg Jackson's for 2 weeks, and then go to this boxing gym in LA, and then all of a sudden he shows up to a fight, and he even admits after the fight, he's like, I couldn't adjust in there. I didn't have the right people behind me to help me adjust when things weren't going my way.
Yeah.
So that's what I think when it comes to Luke Rockhold is. I think that was part of his issue towards the end because he wasn't spending a lot of time at AKA. He was spending time with Volkan Ozdemir over here. I'm training over here, going over. It's not a recipe for somebody who you want to come back facing the killers of 185.
The good thing is, it seems like he's been at the Ruka gym with I believe, I could be wrong. Is Mark Henry the striking coach there?
I'm not sure.
It's one of like the big three. Like might be Trevor Whitman. Regardless, he seems to be at the Ruka gym and kind of focusing on that. Maybe he's getting the structure he needs. He seems to be in great shape. You know what I mean? But the question that's going to always be raised is, he might not necessarily. He's not at the end of his career. He's on the tail end of his prime, but I would say he's still in his prime. But has he taken too many ass whoopings? Has he been knocked out too many times? All those things are going to factor into if he's going to be able to make a successful return. I don't know if he's going to be able to return and do anything, actually do anything with it. I don't see him beating Sean Strickland. And if he does, I don't see it. I don't see him in the top 10, if I'm being honest. And if he cracks top 10, he's not going top 5. I don't think he beats anybody, even in the realm of a title contendership. I don't think he's there anymore.
Yeah, and it might not even be a story of him just extremely regressing. I think sometimes just divisions pass people by.
Yeah, people evolve, and sometimes you get stuck. And like I said, he's not necessarily out of his prime. He's just at the tail end of his prime. And there's guys that are just getting into their prime that are probably going to win that fight just off athleticism. And even, like I said, he's one of the most skillful guys, but is he able to put it all together and actually properly defend himself? Because pretty much most of the times he's gotten knocked out, it seems like his hands are down, his chin's up.
Extremely poor technique.
Yeah, stupid shit like that.
The Romero knockout, you look at the Blachowicz knockout was more on the break of a
biggest
clinch.
one to me is the Bisping fight. That was just dumb.
Yeah,
Bisping doesn't knock people out.
And Rockhold always showed that glaring hole in his game, and it just never seemed to get fixed. And maybe this time off is what he needed. Maybe he just had some kind of mental block that would prohibit from him.
That kills fighters, man.
Yeah.
Mental toughness and being mentally prepared is fucking hard. A lot of guys, you get in there and you start facing adversity, and your instinct is your brain just tells you oh, I'm not cut out for this, or whatever. You're oh, you should just quit, shit like that. You always get negative thoughts, but it takes a lot of fucking hard work to push through that and say, I am the fucking best. I am supposed to win this fight. I'm gonna win this fight. You gotta have a certain confidence that you carry, and sometimes people can break you, and it's fucking hard.
Yeah, I wanted to cover one more thing on this card. So one of the performance of the night bonuses was given to a woman named Cheyenne Baez, who got a TKO, I believe, in the first round.
Yep.
And that was one of the bigger stories on social media all throughout, the past few nights. Was when she was given the bonus, she was extremely emotional. It changed her life significantly to receive $50,000, and the UFC even used the video of her reaction as social media content, and it's supposed to be a feel-good moment. But honestly, dude, most of the people I've seen talk about it on Twitter, it's not a feel-good moment. It's almost like
it's depressing.
It's depressing, the fact that somebody was crying their eyes out, that the fact that they received $50,000 as a professional athlete in the premier organization of MMA.
Yeah, that gets their head beat in.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because I honestly agree with that viewpoint, but it wasn't always like that as far as the general consensus of the MMA fan base over the past few years. And now it's it gets nipped right in the bud as soon as the UFC tries to pull something like that. Immediately the narrative switches to why are they in a position to be struggling? And I understand the other side of the argument because this is only her second UFC fight. It's only her first UFC win. I get that. But at the same time, where are we if any other major sport, especially UFC is valued just as much as any other big sport. I mean, what, it got bought out at $4 billion a few
Yep.
years ago. I mean, I know this argument is as old as time, but it's still as relevant today. Is why is it a thing for somebody to be treating $50,000 for one of two fights a year, where that's like a gold mine to them?
Based off I saw a chart the other day. Based off like the revenue and profit, like MLB, NFL, other major league sports pay out about between anywhere from 40 to 60 some percent of their revenue back to their players. I think the UFC is like 16%, if this is correct. It was something within those few percentile, and it's a fucking shame that they're making all this money and it's not being distributed properly because if I remember, she said that she was negative in her bank account, and the $20,000 to show and to win were just paying debt off. That was just to pay debt. She moved, she got a new house, training fees, moving fees, everything like that. She was going to break even. She would have broken dead even. Probably, maybe still be in the negative. Maybe a couple, maybe she has a few $100s left. But then she had to use that to get her through another fight camp and fight again to break even and fight again to break even. And if it wasn't for that 50,000, which she'll probably see 30,000 of, like that is really life changing because that adds a little bit of comfort. It lets you focus on training, proper nutrition, proper recovery. You don't have to worry about bills. Your lights aren't going to get turned off. Things like that. Way too often you hear stories of guys still living in their fucking cars or living at the gym when they're on their second UFC fight, third UFC fight, and it's a shame.
And my thing is, I understand because you'll get hit with the basically like the bootstrap argument. Like, you look at champions in the UFC that started off rough, and maybe they had a similar story to this where they were, sleeping on the mats and doing this. And I understand that because it's like I'm a believer of the American dream to some extent, but I feel like you shouldn't have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps after you're already in the UFC.
No,
If
you
you're in
should
a
be in the
minor league,
UFC and be made.
yeah, if you're in the minor league doing that, if you're fighting, wherever,
Regional
RFA
level.
and stuff like that, I can understand the idea of like you might be like on the red in your bank account and stuff like that. But once you make the UFC, man, I just can't see how in any logical world where you're still living like that. And it goes back to something we talked about in the previous stints of the podcast is you're not going to get the best version of fighters if they're fighting for survival because like
Yeah.
you said, they don't have the best resources available to them because they can barely afford the minimum to get them through a fight camp.
Yeah, they're not going to have proper nutrition and proper recovery. And another example is Mike Davis. He's probably 4 fights in the UFC now, maybe. But he won the 2019 Tiger Muay Thai tryouts, and he was there for a year for free. He comes back. He's in Florida now. I believe he trains with American Top Team. I could be wrong. But he was selling his gloves from Tiger Muay Thai that he used over there in training camp on like Instagram, like in like a raffle. And it's like it's a fucking shame that this guy's probably selling those to pay rent that month.
Mm-hmm.
And he's probably got roommates and shit like that. It shouldn't be that. The guy's a fucking talented fighter. He's a hell of an athlete, and his skill set's unbelievable. And he puts a showcase on every time he fights. The guy's a fucking absolute savage. And here he is selling a used pair of gloves when, like, not to say everybody's the most sentimental person, but it's like, bro, like, those gloves were the gloves that you were given when you went to Tiger Muay Thai. You did your tryouts in 2019. Like, you should hold those near and dear to your heart. Like, those should be hung on the wall, and that should be something that you remember as part of your career that kicked you onto that next step. I think he had one fight in the UFC when he went over there. And it's like, that shit should stick with you for the rest of your career. You should always have those. But he's got to fucking sell them to probably pay bills. That's my assumption.
Yeah, and what I've always talked about is I think the people involved in the UFC just look at it the wrong way because at the end of the day, man, you know what it is because it's what made Dana and the Fertitas especially millions of dollars because they were seeing such a good return on investment of. I think Brendan Schaub had said one time that the percentage paid out to fighters when he was around 7 or 8%,
It's
which
insane.
that's ridiculous. But that's what made the UFC able to sell so fast
Yeah.
for $4 billion. after they bought it for apparently 3 million is what I remember hearing. So and that's the answer at the end of the day of why it's like this. But at the same time, what I've talked about many times before is like I think there's a better way to look at it where if you're just giving them a slightly bigger piece of the pie, not even like it doesn't need to be that your bottom end prelim fighters are driving Ferraris. No, it's just can they survive and can they focus on
Can they live
their
at a
craft?
middle class or upper middle class like level? They should be able to.
Yeah,
Most of them are dirt poor, and
and
they make enough money to cover fight camp, and that's it. And it's like, well, fuck, I gotta fight again in 3 months. Whatever the case may be. It's a constant rotation.
and people want this culture of like the hungry fighter. Oh, I gotta fight to survive. I don't want that. I want
I don't
them
either.
to I want them to focus on their craft in a proper way, and I want that to lead to a world where other athletic stars want to come to MMA as soon as they're done whatever they're doing.
Yeah, because you're gonna get better athletes.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if the pay was better, you'd see more collegiate wrestlers and things like that pursue the UFC than are currently doing that. Because right now there's a few promising guys. Like you had Phil Davis, but that was later in his career. You got a guy like Bo Nickel, who's a year or two out of college. He's been at American Top Team pretty often now, but it's like, where's he going to go from here? Is he just training to train? Is he going to try to make it to the UFC? Is he going to fight through the regional bracket? What's he going to do? You don't know. And it's like, does it pay enough? I'm sure it doesn't pay more than it would pay for him to just go wrestle on the Olympic team or try to make a world team, things like that. There's no way it pays more. So it's like he's doing this to try to get a longer ultimate payout because he could take what people would consider the easier route and stick with wrestling and be like, oh, well, at least I don't have to get punched in the head, you know? So I feel like this is why I'm for unionization within the UFC. I'm not, like you said, not every fight needs to be $100,000 fight or this, that, and the other. But these guys should be making at least $30,000 to $40,000 per fight. They should. And if they can't fucking afford to pay that many people per card, knock 2 or 3 fights off a card and just do more cards. They'll make their money. People want to watch UFC all the time. When there's a weekend where there isn't UFC, everybody's like, fuck, what am I going to do?
Yeah, like people go through withdrawals. It's
Yeah.
crazy how it's gotten to that point, but yeah.
Yeah, they've got like over 500 fighters on the roster. You're telling me you can't fill cards up? There should be a card every single weekend. Honestly, there could be.
And I think when it comes to fighters unionizing, I think the one issue is the fighters that we've seen make it. Those are the fighters that we need to see actually lead the charge, and they're never going to do that. Conor McGregor has a wonderful story of making it from nothing, being on welfare, being a plumber, and his girlfriend basically supporting him through all that, and he makes it, and he's now easily the richest athlete in the sport of MMA.
How many guys don't make it though because they don't have
Right.
those same opportunities?
And we don't hear about that. It's because it's not a feel good story. You're not
Yeah.
going to see that on the cover of a Sports Center, or, ESPN magazine, and see it on Sports Center. So you go through, you're looking through the rose-colored lenses of like, oh, if you work hard, you do this, you do everything right, then it'll all work out. Or 9 out of 10 guys, it doesn't work out because that's sometimes the reality, as harsh as it is.
Yeah, life sucks sometimes.
Yeah.
And not everybody can be a millionaire and make it.
And we need to look through reality to establish like what the rules should be when it comes to the MMA as a whole, not even just the UFC, but more specifically the UFC. That's where it starts, is until the big stars get on that train of helping the younger coming up fighters, then it's never going to change.
And the UFC pushes back so hard on unionization that it's like it's dead in the water. And it just sucks that the guys that are pushing forward right now are guys like Mark Hunt and things like that have kind of gotten fucked by the UFC towards the end. So then it kind of delegitimizes it because it's like, oh, well, these are just some like disgruntled ex-employees or whatever you want to say. And honestly, man, like it's so hard because you're stuck with like a catch-22 of like, well, do I just tell them I'm not going to fight unless I get X amount of money, or do I just take what I got now and hope I get paid more later? Because if you go the route of take what you got and hope you get paid more later, well, what happens if you lose 2 or 3 fights in a row? Well, now you don't have a fucking job. Or you say, hey, I'm not going to fight until you pay me X amount of dollars. Well, what if they just say no? Because you're replaceable. But if everybody says no, then what the fuck are they going to do but pay everybody another 15, 20, 30% on what they're making now?
And that's
They're
the
gonna
big thing.
have to.
I like that you touched on that because we saw Jorge Masvidal go through that last year, and it was really disgusting to see Dana White use the pandemic as a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like I don't want to go into that, but that was basically what you were talking about, of making a decision where you have to maybe take a short-term contract and almost bet on yourself to deliver, and then you'll get a bigger contract, or you take the bigger contract and you might be stuck for a while, because that's basically what had happened before he got his title fight with Kamaru Usman. Was he was on a long-term contract, and Dana White was using that as a weapon against him. But the thing was, his stock had grown significantly since when he signed the contract.
Tenfold.
Because he delivered the greatest knockout in UFC history, the fastest knockout in UFC history. It's something you've seen played a million times by now. You know how much money, how much notoriety alone that brought the UFC. And I think that's why ultimately it did work out for him, that he got what he wanted. But it goes back to Dana White could have just ended it right there and said, you're on contract. You get paid X amount of dollars, and that's final. But like you said, if they're working together, the fighters, if they're working together, then you don't have to worry about playing this big gambling game, because it shouldn't be. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I get it, the saying of betting on yourself, but you shouldn't have to do that.
I agree.
It comes down to the fighters should have to worry about fighting. They should have to worry about going to the gym every day and getting better with their technique.
Yeah, not if they can afford to eat after training.
Yeah.
That's not something they should have to worry about.
It's something that shouldn't even be a problem in 2021. But.
Yep.
But to segue onto something else where I might bitch more about UFC management, so we're moving on to the pay-per-view this coming weekend. So it's UFC 265, the interim heavyweight title on the line. We have Derek Lewis, who was originally supposed to fight Francis Ngannou for the undisputed belt. So basically what had happened was Francis Ngannou, months after knocking out the greatest heavyweight of all time, did not want to fight on this card. He wanted to fight on the next pay-per-view.
Now, they only gave him like 2 months or a month after his fight to make this decision.
Biggest fight of his life.
And they told him, basically, let me heal up, give me 6 months or 7, whatever it was. A very respectable amount of time for going through a fight like that, winning the title. You want to train and get back to your, back to your peak. You are the champion now. You want to get back to your peak. You don't want to fight short term or short notice and get fucked up and then be like, well, what do I get a rematch?
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to deal with that. You should be able to fight when you want to fight. Like, because Stipe, he fought Cormier. He lost the first one, if I'm not mistaken. Did he lose the first one with Cormier?
Yeah, because Cormier knocked him out.
He knocked him out with the left hook. Then he fights Cormier again. I mean, 9 months later, something like that. Like a long time, and they basically let Stipe it was kind of like, well, yeah, you fight when you're ready. But then Francis gets the belt, and it's like, well, if you don't fight 3 months after your title fight, 4 months after your title fight, we're making an interim fight.
And it's something that bugs a lot of people, including me, is fighters are technically independent contractors, they're not employees.
Exactly.
But
they want to treat them like employees.
That term is convenient for the UFC because they'll talk about them being independent contractors
when it comes to pay.
When it comes to unionization.
Exactly.
Because when it comes to how much they want and banding together, Dana White says, well, they signed the contract. They could fight whenever they want. I don't have to make anybody fight. And they use that line. But when it comes to a champion who just won a belt, when he doesn't fight exactly when you want him to, all of a sudden you're strong-arming him like an employee. So, so the main reason why they wanted to keep this fight on this card is because Derek Lewis is from Houston, Texas, and that's when where the card is taking place. But one of the things that's bugging me about this is you have a rematch between Derek Lewis and Francis Ngannou. Yes, the first fight was very boring, but you can brush that off and you can sell it as you have a very scary champion who has unavenged loss against this guy named Derek Lewis. And then what the UFC does so well with their matchmaking formula is you have a guy named Ciryl Gane that could wait in the wings for that winner.
Yeah.
And you keep the machine going. You have just a constant flowing machine of contenders. But now, after this main event takes place on Saturday,
who's the next contender?
Yeah, you have the winner of that obviously fight Francis Ngannou, but you're going to have to take forever.
In the back now?
Yeah. What are you going to do? You're most likely going to have Ciryl Gane. You take the loser of this fight, and he's most likely gonna have to win like 2 or 3 more to have any interest in going back for the belt.
And what happens to Stipe? Everybody else that's ever had the belt gets an immediate rematch when they lose. What happens with Stipe? He doesn't get a rematch. They just brushed him off completely.
Right.
He said he wants a rematch, and they
Mhm.
basically kind of said, "Go fuck yourself."
And that's the thing was like I'm sure even yes, Stipe in a perfect world, I saw him sounding off on social media that he deserved an immediate rematch. I wouldn't argue against that, but I also think he would have taken a fight against Ciryl Gane
He probably would have.
and
Yeah.
most likely just have that fight and the winner face the winner of
Lewis
the
and
original
Francis.
main event.
Yeah.
And I just feel like sometimes, man, especially you've heard so much about the new management in the UFC and this new lawyer that's involved. It's we sometimes get away from what made the UFC great to where
Yeah,
it
it's
is
like
now.
it's run by a bunch of fucking dirtbags now that
Hmm.
just care about money. And like I get it. They're trying to make their money back on the fight or on the company that they just bought out. They want to show quarterly returns on investment. They want to make a lot of profit. But fucking over your fighters and creating unhappy fighters is not the way to do that. Especially your champion. You don't do that. Honestly, man, they should have let Stipe fight either one of those guys. I mean, it's Derek in Houston, so they should have let him fight Derek in Houston, and the winner of that fights Francis when Francis is ready to fight, maybe towards beginning of 2022 or end of 2021, whatever the case may be. But instead, they go this route. It kind of doesn't make sense.
So with all that, obviously the fight's still going to take place as much as we don't want it to. But
Yeah.
if we had to give a prediction, who do you think's going to win the main event?
Like I said, Gon is the better striker. He's the better grappler, and his cardio is better. And Derek Lewis is going to win by third round knockout. So
It's,
don't say I didn't tell you.
and the crazy part is, it's like I don't know if I can disagree with that because it's almost like there are certain fights, and Derek Lewis has been a good example of that, where everything on paper is going towards the opponent, but you're like, nah, I still think he's gonna do it. Like I remember Brad talking about Ben Askren's a better grappler. He can dictate where the fight takes place, but Jorge Masvidal is most likely going to spark him, and he ended up being right. And that's kind of like the way I'm looking at this. And no, I'm not going to be surprised if Ciryl Gane goes and wins, a drawn out, maybe boring decision.
Probably a decision. He's definitely not finishing Derek unless it's with a submission. And again, Derek has a black belt in the just get up
Mhm.
martial art. So
And I don't think Ciryl Gane's going to necessarily try to take him down too much.
most definitely not.
He might clinch with him a little bit here and there, try to wear him
That's the
down.
extent of it, though.
Yeah. And that's where like I worry about anybody fighting Derek Lewis unless you're like it does. Yes, Ciryl Gane's a super dedicated, decorated striker, but I feel like anybody that strikes with Derek Lewis for more than 15 minutes, it's like you better watch that chin.
Yeah. For whatever reason, the guy can just hit.
He just finds a way.
Yeah, he finds openings that you maybe don't think are there, or people aren't normally worried about, and he fucking knocks your head off.
And we talk about like obviously all the talk between Francis and Ngannou because I do think Francis Ngannou is the heaviest puncher in MMA, but
Ever. Yeah, you gotta be. Gotta
Derek
be.
Lewis is not far behind him.
Can't
And
be.
it's one of those where he just finds power in the smallest phone booth distances.
He does.
Have you watched that fight with him and Curtis Blades?
Yes.
That uppercut looks like nothing.
No,
It looks like he just touches him.
no, but it looks like he, disconnected his spinal cord.
And you don't even see that with other heavyweights. Yeah, you see uppercut knockouts. And you've seen it on reactive shots and stuff, but it looked like he just
It was so perfectly. It was very well timed, and the amount of power he delivered, like you said, from not much of like a wind up or anything like that, was just nuts. Like he planted his feet and he just sent his fucking nostrils to the moon. It was insane. You don't see it often. There's maybe 3 guys in the heavyweight division that can do that right now.
And ultimately, I think that's where my prediction lies because I wouldn't bet money on this fight, but I just can't pick against Derek Lewis and all the unspeakable things that he brings to a fight.
Yeah, like honestly, I think Derek Lewis is the 3rd best heavyweight, and I think Francis and Stipe both beat him. I do, at least for now. We'll see if my mind changes on that, but I think both of those guys beat him, and I think he has a real hard time getting to the belt. But I do think he is the 3rd best heavyweight in in the UFC right now.
I agree, and it's so commendable the fact that it's almost a meme at this point where if you're trying to show Derek Lewis to somebody who doesn't watch fighting, then you're trying to explain how good he is. It's like he's not a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He's
not very technical at all with anything other than maybe boxing, and even then he gets a little wild.
And even like he looks like he's not in the greatest physical shape, but he just has this super world cardio and super world power, and it's just hard for me to pick against him, man.
Yep.
I think I'm definitely going with him on that. But the co-main event is a very interesting fight. We have Jose Aldo versus Pedro Munoz.
Let's go Aldo.
Yeah, you on the Aldo train?
Always, brother.
Yeah, I'm on the Munoz train because
this is at bantamweight, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Aldo looks good at bantamweight. I think he's a hell of a fighter. Whatever he's doing to be able to get down to bantamweight now, I find very impressive. You never see a guy later in his career drop a weight class. They always go up a weight class, and for him to do that is very commendable. The only other person doing that right now is Cody Garbrandt, going down to 125 to fight Kai Kara-France.
Is he doing that?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
that was just announced today.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, so Jose Aldo, I'm definitely I'm happy he's still relevant. I definitely didn't like this move at first, going down to 35, but he proved me wrong. And he had just picked up a win against Marlon Chito Vera, so he's still very much relevant in the division. But
yeah, for sure, he's got a lot of fight left in him, I think.
I'm one of those guys that thinks Pedro Munoz has been a victim of his schedule a little bit because you look back at some of his losses. He has a loss against the now champion Aljamain Sterling. He lost a decision against Frankie Edgar that I really didn't agree with at the time, but I think he brings a lot of unique elite skill to this division where he does a lot of things so well. He has very, very good submission skills to fall back on, but it seems like even at, I think he's about 33, 34, he's still evolving as a striker, and he's introducing a calf kick to his game that he used against Jimmy Rivera in his last fight. I don't know who he's working with on his striking, but it seems like he's hitting a new level that you see some guys hit when they work with like a Mark Henry, or like sometimes when you see a guy work with like Joe Schilling.
Yeah.
It's just so awesome to see that, where you think somebody's in a box for their whole career and then all of a sudden they're evolving. It's like an old dog learning new tricks, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing with Aldo's. Everybody kind of counted him out for a while. When he dropped to 135 originally, everybody thought it was a shitty idea. You know, how's he doing this? Why is he doing this? Honestly, man, Aldo's not that old. Like, for as long as he's been around, you would think the guy's like in his 40s. I think he's 35, maybe that. I think 34, 35. He's not the youngest guy, but he's still in his prime, I would say. Might be like a Rockhold situation, like tail end of the prime, but God, the guy's got a lot of experience for being in his mid-30s.
Mm-hmm. And it might be one of those, we don't know if maybe he's like fight old, you know, like.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe this is it. Maybe he's coming to an end, or maybe he's hitting a new stride within a new weight class. It's hard to say.
So one of the bigger fights, I do think that fight has big title implications as far as like, I think the loser of that fight is probably on a big downward momentum, and then the winner's on a big upward momentum. But even more so, this fight with Michael Chiesa and Vicente Luque.
I'm very excited for this fight. I'm a big Chiesa fan.
Same here. I think he's 4-0 at welterweight now, and he just won his first main event against Neil Magny.
Neil Magny, very good fight.
Yeah,
love Neil too, man. That was an awesome fight.
So this is really I think this is the biggest fight of Michael Chiesa's career. He's had big marquee matchups at lightweight when he fought Kevin Lee and stuff like that.
Don't talk about my mom.
So if he wins this fight, we're very much talking about him getting a shot at the belt very soon.
For sure, he's definitely knocking on that door.
And he's never had that before.
No, and he's really getting close to knocking on that door if he wins this fight.
And this is a big test for him because Vicente Luque is still
just
very
beat,
game.
Tyron Woodley, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a very good fight where Woodley almost had his ass. Woodley had him in some shitty spots. And arguably, you could say maybe Chiesa's like a better wrestler. Would you agree?
Yeah, and it becomes a thing because I guess we haven't seen Luque use his grappling too much in his past few fights because he just went in and started throwing hands with Woodley.
Very powerful striker.
And he definitely had a unique striking plan against Wonder Boy, and it didn't work out for him, but it was interesting to see him not so much try to wrestle him. But I think it's a very interesting fight because there's so many different things to talk about, because I think if it comes down to like if they had take the MMA out of it. If they had a straight jiu-jitsu match, I think Chiesa would win. But
Yeah, I think he
obviously that's
wins
not what they're
9 out of
doing.
10 times.
Yeah. But when you talk about jiu-jitsu within MMA, it's a completely different ballgame.
Oh,
Who would get?
100%.
Who's gonna? If it does end up with a lot of grappling, who's gonna end up on top more? If Chiesa ends up on his back, is he gonna try a lot of his guard game, or is he gonna try to get back to his feet and reset? And when it comes to striking, I think more about Luque's power, because I feel like, yeah, you might want to mess around with him on the feet for a little while, but if he cracks you once, then you're gonna be
In a world of pain.
yeah, you're
you're
world,
gonna be
world
in
of
a bad
pain. Your
spot.
mental state's going to be in a much different spot than what it was before. So
For sure.
he can knock. He's one of those that can knock the confidence out of you. You
Oh,
know?
fucking, you're damn right about that.
So it's really hard for me to pick a winner of that fight. As much as I love Chiesa, I might say that this is where his momentum comes to a halt, even just for now.
Right.
If it
He
maybe
might get
just
stopped after this one.
right, and
Might have to rebuild.
yeah, even if he loses, I don't think he just disappears for a while.
Yeah.
I think he could hop right back on the train. But obviously, like I said, if he wins, then huge momentum, huge.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. There's gonna be a big hype train on him.
Do you think he wins?
I think if he wins, my heart tells me he's gonna win. I want him to win. My brain tells me that if he's going to win, he needs to strike on the feet a little bit, maybe dip his toes in the water, and then he needs to get a takedown, and he needs to finish Luque from back mount. He needs to get him down on all fours against the cage, and he needs to rear naked choke him. That's what he's got to do to win this fight. I do not feel like he has the power to fuck Luque up. He's not going to TKO him. He's not going to knock him out, in my opinion. He's got to get him on the ground and either grind out for 3 rounds, or he's got to get a submission. That's where he wins that fight. I do not see him winning on the feet.
It makes you wonder, because I think a 5-round fight at welterweight favors Chiesa in a lot of matchups at welterweight.
Immensely, yeah.
But this is 3 rounds, obviously. So is this going to hinder that possible?
I mean, him and Neil Magny came out fucking, like, they did not really slow down for 5 rounds, man. It was very impressive. Both of them showed excellent technique, excellent grappling exchanges between both. Striking exchanges were great. I feel like it was a pretty damn good fight, and I think if Chiesa can bring that same energy, and I'm sure he's evolved even more now with his striking and grappling, I think he's gonna have like a hell of an argument for a decision win, if not a submission. But he's gonna have to grind it out on the ground for 3 rounds, honestly.
So I think this card would have been a lot stronger, obviously, if we had the undisputed title fight. But
For sure.
at the end of the day, things happen. It is what it is. But I think there's a lot of good, consistent star power on this card. Nothing too extraordinary. But I feel like the hardcore fan is going to have a lot of fun with this card, because
definitely.
there's so many title implications in so many different divisions. I'm looking through the prelims, and one more fight that caught my eye is the return of Karolina Kowalkiewicz.
Okay.
So this is her first fight since pre-COVID. She had fought in February of 2020,
Right.
and she's currently on a 4-fight losing streak. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring her up, because very respectable. She's actually been very open about her mental struggles after this skid of losses that she's been on. And she had lost to when she fought for the belt back. It was that was at UFC 205. It seemed like she was going to be there for a while, but then she wins a couple more, and then she loses to Andrade. It's like, that's understandable. Then she loses to Michelle Waterson, Alexa Grasso, and it's like, none of those chicks are bad, but obviously she's working her way down.
Definitely, you were working your way down after Andrade, and then once you get to Grasso, it's like you're starting to really fall off towards the end. Like you're at the bottom of the top 15 and things like that, and it's not looking good.
And she, honestly, from the way she had spoken about it, was like, she's one of those where her being a fighter is a huge part of her identity, and that's a lot of fighters is
their whole life is martial arts,
and that's why a lot of them don't want to retire, because it's like that's their whole life, and that's what they've worked so hard to do. That's who they are. And she was open talking about thoughts of suicide, and I don't want to dig too much into this, but I do want to just take a moment to respect the fact that she was so open about it, because
100%.
I feel like that is important for fighters to be honest about that, because there could be hundreds more fighters in the UFC that think like that, but we just don't know.
Every time you lose a fight, it's the shittiest feeling in the world, and there's nothing you can do about. People always want to say, well, how do you deal with losses? And honestly, it's like you just fucking deal with it. You just like my coaches used to tell me but like in high school when I wrestled, like if I lost a big match that had like state title implications, like getting ready to go to the state championship and shit, if I lost a match that cost me that, they tell me you have the end of the night. You have till the end of the night to be mad at yourself, and you're going to come back in that wrestling room tomorrow, and you're going to bust your fucking ass. And that's all you can do. You can be mad at yourself as much as you want. You can be down on yourself. That was our rule. We got one day. We got one night to be shitty, be upset, and be mad at ourselves. And after that, we come in the next day ready to bust our ass and work and be better. That's all you can do. You can just sit in your sorrow, or you can say, yeah, I fucking lost, and I'm going to be better now.
And I think a thing that I realize is, like, I understand the mentality of a fighter. You have to just believe wholeheartedly that you're going to win. And some of the best stories, some of the best underdog stories come from like a fighter basically speaking as if they've already won, but they just need to just go do it. But there comes a catch-22 with that, is if you're on the losing end, then I think you end up with this kind of mentality where like you feel so lost, and like it's almost like your reality is not playing out what you thought it would be, so you're just caught in this really weird haze.
And it's really hard to dig yourself out of that rut once you're there. So I'm honestly happy she's taken all this time off. It's probably in her best interest for her team and for herself and mental health and things like that to have had all this time off. I'm hoping she comes back and can put something together. Like, I really hope she gets a win.
And it would definitely be a feel-good story if she does win.
100%, yeah. Regardless of what she does after this, I would like to see her get another win in the UFC.
All right, so we'll wrap it up. So
the last thing I want to talk about, we are sleeping on Angela Hill and Tisha Torres.
Tisha Torres, that is a good fight.
Now,
Not
this
bad
is
on that one.
Rematch of a fight that Angela Hill won, in my opinion, but the judges screwed her. Angela Hill's career is riddled with fights that have she's won a lot of decisions, in my book, that the judges have not seen her way. And you see it on social media every time she gets screwed. People go nuts.
That fight with Claudia Gadelha,
Yes.
I was rooting for Claudia Gadelha, and I was at the end of it like,
how did that happen?
Yeah.
How did that happen? And it's happened to her more often than not.
And you imagine if just a
fights.
couple of those go her way, how like she could be fighting for a belt, and
she should be fighting for a belt.
And I think she's very, very talented, and she could be,
Yeah. So now she's in a position where she's got a rematch against a girl that she should have already had a win over, and now she has to go out there and finish the fight to prove to everybody that it's not a fluke or this, that, and the other. I feel like I like both girls. I'm a big Angela Hill fan. I would love to see her get a win and advance up in the division because I do believe she's been screwed over one too many times. It's just very unfortunate. And if she gets this win tonight or this coming card, I feel like she doesn't need to avenge who's her last fight? I'm blanking. You just said her name.
Oh, you're talking about Claudia?
Claudia. Yeah, she won't have to really avenge that because, in my opinion, she already beat her ass. This fight, she already won. It's time to move on from that. If she wins this fight, we gotta go up. We gotta go up from here. We shouldn't be stuck on dwelling on rematches if we don't have to.
Yeah, that's a really good top four for this card. I'm not complaining about this card at all, but I think we're gonna wrap it up here. So that's UFC 265 this coming weekend. We both have Derek Lewis in the main event. I think he'll find a way to do it. But thank you guys for watching. Make sure to give this video a like. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment. Tell us how you think we did. Any constructive criticism is definitely appreciated. Till next time, see you on the mats.
All right, guys, thank you for tuning into the Mat Time Podcast. Do not forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Let us know how you feel about the topics we discussed. And you can find our social media down in the description. Thank you guys for tuning in.